My name's Edward J. Harrington, and I joined the Marine Corps in September the 2nd, 1948, and was inducted in San Francisco, California. And we took the Daylight Coast train that used to go down the coast from San Francisco to San Diego. So I found the DIs were very disciplined and well-spoken, and they were the best supervisors and trainers I'd ever had up to that time. And their language was much better. And they had a purpose, and they were training us and preparing us to be Marines in combat. And our principal DI, Sergeant Geetson, told us he wanted to have good Marines with him the next time we went to war. And that was why he was training us. And it turned out later he was a weapons company section leader in Korea, and very brave, and lived up to all of the things he had you would have expected of him. Anyhow, and we were in platoon 87, which was an honor platoon. And we all took great pride in what we did, and it was a very good unit. Assigned, ordered to a group that go as a replacement to the 9th Marines in Shanghai, China. But by that time it was early 49, and Mao Zedong and the communists had taken over China, and the Marines were pulled out. And the 9th Marines were diverted to Guam and back to the United States. So when we were mid-Pacific, our ship changed course and headed for Guam, and we were then temporarily assigned to the 1st Provisional Marine Brigade. And all of the units were filled up. So a lot of us were put in the headquarters and service company, and I spent my time being a chaser, where you guard prisoners. They'd be on work details, and you'd be given a shotgun and told not to let anybody escape, and if they did, that you would do the rest of their time. So that was one way of getting acquainted. We used to guard old equipment dumps in the jungle, and that was it. They were challenging posts, and we were told to see that no one stole any of the old 5-gallon cans of paint, or any of the vehicles that had rusted into the coral, and the coral had grown up into the tires, and I don't think you could have moved them with dynamite, but we would be out there in the middle of the night on a challenging post, protecting them from theft. So after 3 or 4 months of that, the 1st Provisional Marine Brigade was ordered back to Camp Pendleton, where the Marine Corps was reassembling the 1st Marine Division for the first time after the Second World War. And so we were put into different holding companies until we got permanent assignments. So I was in an engineering supply company, and assigned to cut grass out on the hills of Camp Pendleton with a machete. And I see the logic behind that. You don't want to have a bunch of bored 18-year-olds that haven't been worn out by taps. So they kept us busy on the hillsides. And we never did have a grass fire while I was there. One time I'd gone on a 3-day pass home, and when I got back, there was just a fire guard in the barracks, and I wondered where he was, because I got in just before midnight, and I saw all these lights over in area by some warehouses, and I went over there to inquire about it. There was our company on their big floodlights, packing up and getting ready to go overseas. The North Koreans had invaded South Korea June 25th, 1950, and by early July, the First Provisional Marine Brigade had been reformed out of the First Marine Division, and the core of it was one infantry regiment, the 5th, some units of the 11th Marines that were 105 howitzers, and a company of support units. So I found out that the company I was with, A Company, 1st Motor Transport Battalion, was going to be part of the brigade. And I had a really great job. I worked for a master sergeant named Bratchler, and he'd been in the Marine Corps for over 30 years. And they were adding these 50 caliber anti-aircraft capable machine guns to these support units, because they expected the next time they went into a war, they would need that capability. There'd be a lot of aerial attacks like there had been in the Second World War. That's all they have to go on is what they needed in the last war. So I was his assistant. He was a great, big, powerful man, way over 6 feet tall and broad and muscular. And at that time, I was 5'4" 3/4" tall and weighed 145 pounds. So I used to pack around the great aluminum telescoping tripods that the 50s would be mounted on, and that was my job. But he was really a good boss, and I liked him. And so I saw him, and he told me that we were shipping out for overseas, and eventually we'd end up in Korea. So on July 14th, 1950, we boarded AKA, that's a Navy assault cargo transport, carries about 150 people and equipment that goes with them. And we headed out across the Pacific, and we got, one morning, the guys were saying, hey, the Hawaiian Islands are just off the starboard bow. So I ran up there, and this is 1950, right? And that didn't happen that time. That actually happened on the way to Guam. Geez, the old man's memory. On the way to Guam, that had happened, and up on deck, and we were off of Oahu, and Waikiki was just this little sliver of pink sand in the distance and Diamond Head, and the only hotel you could see was the Royal Hawaiian, and it was pink. And behind that was all green. There weren't all those big, tall hotels. And so the ship went down the coast and into Pearl Harbor. And so I rushed down and got the uniform I thought would be the Liberty uniform, khakis, and put on that gear, so that uniform. So when Liberty went, I'd be ready to hop ashore. So I ran up on deck, and we came in by Ford Island. I could see the docks and the people. It seemed like I could just almost reach out and touch them. Maybe they were 100 feet away. And I was waiting for the ship to stop. And it just kept going around Ford Island, turned right around, and headed right back out the channel and left Pearl Harbor and left Oahu, and I never saw another island till Guam. That happened, that was early 49 or late 48. But on the way to Korea, we didn't stop at any islands or go by them. But, and later I learned that our little trip around Ford Island there was a degaussing cable, that when these Navy ships sail across oceans, they develop a problem with their polarity. So then they get degaussed. These cables are charged with electricity, and it straightens out the ship's electrical orientation. So anyhow, on our way across the Pacific, in July of 1950, we had classes on how to be a good citizen of the United States and represent our country well to the Japanese, with Japanese phrases, Japanese culture, how to be polite and represent our country well. And so we all knew for sure we were going to end up in Japan for training and we'd be able to see that country. Well, we went right by that and went straight to Busan, Korea, and disembarked and loaded up and headed off to a little town called Mason. And then north of Mason is when we first engaged the enemy and lost friends and got a feel for what that was all going to be about. And one of the strange things, the Army divisions, the 24th and the 25th, all reported that they couldn't hold their positions, they'd have to withdraw. So that was the whole central defense of South Korea, north of Busan, just collapsed because those divisions retreated and left us out on the coast. And the information I had at the time, we were about 30 miles strung out on this little tiny dirt road with no signs, and we couldn't read them if there were signs. At the time, we were about 30 miles strung out on this little tiny dirt road with no signs, and we couldn't read them if there were signs. And so we had to retreat back to Mason, and I didn't realize that was a precursor of the Chosin Reservoir, that we were stuck way out on a dirt road, totally surrounded by the enemy, and in just a really hopeless situation, but we got back down intact. One of the vehicles we were using was a Weasel. It's a track lane amphibious vehicle, but out in that area with no lights and no sounds and no background cities, the sound of those tracks on that dirt road sounded like it was extremely loud, and we were sure that was going to attract all the bad guys in the world, but we got through there okay, and after that I never saw another Weasel in the Marine Corps. Apparently there were some people gaining information and learning from what was going on. And my military occupational specialty by that time was motor vehicle dispatcher, which I'd never done. I was still the assistant to Master Sergeant Bratcher regarding the anti-aircraft thing. Well, the United States had control of the air over all the places we were, and I never saw an enemy plane. We were never strafed or bombed by an enemy plane. And so as we moved about, it was very fluid lines during those first few months there. And so we dropped the anti-aircraft defenses, and then I was assigned a perimeter defense around wherever our headquarters or vehicles were, and sometimes I would be given assignments as a single driver on a single truck, taking ammunition to infantry units that were on the line, and one time 90 millimeter shells to the tanks. So I have a couple things that three things that impressed me about that. The background is that the perimeter, the South Koreans and the American military controlled about 30 miles east and west and north of Busan, and all the rest of South Korea was under control of the North Koreans. And one of the lines was the Naktom River. So that was a significant area that was fought over, and our unit went there in two distinct engagements. But I remember one of them, I got an assignment to take some ball ammunition for 30 caliber ammunition for M1 rifles to an infantry battalion CP. And I remember I was coming along this dirt road on a ridge and looking down, and it was like a big diorama, and there were North Koreans on a hill across, separated by a small valley, and there were Corsairs strafing the Koreans who were, instead of taking cover, they were running around this hill, and it was almost absurd that, and then the Corsairs would circle back and strafe them again, and they were still running around trying to avoid the bullets. But my assignment was to go down into that valley, and I could see that the CP I was going to was under fire, and what it was is a staff officer and 2 or 3 NCOs, the CP, the whole thing was just these people ducked down behind about a waist-high rice paddy ditch. We used to divide these paddies up by these little like levee things, and to control the water level in the rice paddies. This one had been drained, and these guys were ducking behind this little berm, and the incoming fire was coming over them. So anyhow, I drove down there, and by the time I got near where they were, the truck was higher. The cab of the truck was higher than the protective berm. So as I pulled in where these guys were, I hopped out of there quickly and ran around to the back, and they already were pulling these little wooden cases of ball ammunition out of there. And I saw that they had no more than 2 bandoliers of M1 ammunition at the CP for that whole infantry battalion that was engaged in serious firefights. So I really felt that that was a significant contribution, and that reminded me how important that kind of work was. So and a few days later, another aspect of that was water for the troops. So I got assigned to pick up a 500-gallon water trailer and go to a place where the engineers were sanitizing water, because there was no running potable water, no electricity, no sewers, and none of the amenities that you would find in a more modern industrialized society. So they just pumped water out of the rivers, but then they had to, I'm blocking on the proper word for that, but prepare it so it was potable. So I went down to where the engineers were and waited in a line of 3 or 4 trucks to get this 500-gallon water tank full. And I noticed there was an Army MP infantry company, tents. And so they had a couple fairly decent-sized tents, like 12 by 20 or something, and then a bunch of pup tents. And something attracted my attention. I looked over there and I saw 2 soldiers shouting at each other. Then they whirled around. One went to a pup tent, one went into a larger tent, and they reemerged. The guy from the larger tent had a 45 caliber pistol, and the guy from the pup tent had M1 carbine, and they fired simultaneously, and they both fell down. So that's the only action I ever saw the Army in. That these 2 guys, MPs, had an argument. I don't know what it was about. And they shot each other, and they had it was really short range, like 7 or 8 yards. They rushed right at each other and fired simultaneously, and they both went down, so the shots that counted. Then another time I remember is because I get these single assignments when things would come up, and I'd be there, and I had the driver's license and all that skills. They told me to join this tanker staff sergeant, and he would show me an assistant where we go to pick up 90 millimeter tank shells. So we drove down to Pusan docks, and these cases of shells were loaded directly from the hold of the ship right into the bed of the truck. And then we drove off, and he was going to show us where the tanks were that needed the shells. And we drove north. And remember, this is about a 30-mile perimeter. We drove north all day on these dirt roads. No signs, didn't know what they were doing, but this staff sergeant from the tanks supposed to know where to go. Then it got dark, and we didn't know where we were. I only saw one or two little tiny signs, and I couldn't read the writing. And then we got stopped at a roadblock by armed men. And they had 2 or 3 kinds of partial uniforms, and some people would have a hat, but no other part of a uniform, or they might have a jacket and a cap, but they had a mix of weapons, and they tried to interrogate us, but we couldn't speak whatever language they were speaking, and they couldn't speak English. So they gesticulated at our truck, which was an international that the Russians had copied, so that a lot of the characteristics of our truck matched the characteristics of Russian trucks, and our emblems weren't U.S. Army emblems. So I don't know what happened, but I think they were fighting over whether we were on their side or not. And they were really angry and gesturing with all these weapons, and there were 3 of us, and we were totally surrounded as if we didn't know where we were. And it was so finally the side that said "let us go" won, and they waved us on. So we drove, and the next day we were coming. I decided, the hell, this guy doesn't know where he's going or anything, so we're just heading south and see what we can do. We were coming down this road headed south, and we saw an American Army tank, and we stopped, and they said, "Where the hell are you guys coming from?" And we told them, "We don't know. We've been lost for a day and a night." And they said, "There's not supposed to be anybody north of us. We're on a reconnaissance patrol, and there's supposed to be no American troops up here." And we were pretty hungry and wanted water, and they had extra sea rations on their tank and water, so they shared it with us. And they were really puzzled and amazed by our coming south from where we'd been. So I always assumed that we were lost behind enemy lines, and had that encounter with, but I haven't got much information to go on, but it was interesting. And we never did find the tanker's outfit. So there were 3 incidents there. And there were fun things, along with a lot of deprivation and stress and unpleasantness. So the unpleasantness in my mind, and I never like to talk about it, is I was in the Marine Corps for 22 months before Korea, and I'd made a lot of good friends, and we lived together, as you do in barracks, and we would go on liberty together. And so I lost some of those friends, and that, I would say, that's pretty painful. And even after over 60 years, I don't want to talk about it, because I think it's private information. In a way, it's sacred. It's they have families and friends, and it's I would never want to say anything that would hurt any of them. And it's just something I wouldn't ever talk about. So I notice a lot of guys, when they tell their war stories are always about interesting and adventuresome or fun things, not about what happened to their friends. And I think I understand that. I don't know how general that feeling is, but I got an idea it's pretty widespread.